just first of all say a few words about what the Episcopal Church Foundation is. The Episcopal Church Foundation is an independent, lay-led foundation whose mission is to build the leadership and financial capability of our church's congregations, dioceses, and other institutions. If you haven't had a chance to already, I'd encourage you to check out our website at www.episcopalfoundation.org. And be sure to also see our publication, ecfvitalpractices.org. That's www.ecfvp.org. ECF provides a variety of financial and leadership services. We help congregations do successful capital campaigns, start planned giving programs, and more. But one of the most important things that we do is what we're doing right now tonight. We offer on-site and online workshops on the leadership and financial challenges facing Episcopal churches today. So all of that said, I want to welcome you again to tonight's web conference, and I also want to especially welcome our presenter, Sandy Kolb. A lifelong Episcopalian, Sandy is a member of St. Albans Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C., where she is chair of the Interfaith Committee and member of the Adult Forum and Outreach Committees. She's been a vestry member, a senior warden, and chair of the search committee. At the diocesan level, she served on the Commission on Ministry and as an alternate deputy to the 2009 General Convention. Sandy has been with Fresh Start for over 10 years, initially as the coordinator of curriculum, and now as a Fresh Start consultant for ECF. She serves as the coordinator for the Diocese of Washington's Fresh Start program. She had a 33-year-long career in the federal government, most of it serving as an internal organizational consultant, designing and conducting management and executive development programs. And now she's a search transition consultant to congregations in her diocese and works with congregations doing team building, vestry development, and planning. So she brings, obviously, a lot of experience and expertise to this presentation. And so it's a joy to have her lead this. So with that, Sandy, I'm going to turn off my webcam and I'd ask everyone else who has their webcam on to go ahead and do the same so that we can see Sandy as she does her presentation. Great.
Hey, great. So thank you very much, Miguel, and thank you all for joining. It looks like we've got people from all over the country, and it also looks like most of you are just starting in the transition process with clergy who are leaving in the spring or who have left fairly recently, and so we'll keep that in mind as we go along. I'd like to start our session this evening with a brief reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 13, verses 17 through 22. This particular version comes from the Message Bible. It so happened that after Pharaoh released the people, God didn't lead them by the road through the land of the Philistines, which was the shortest route. For God thought, if the people encounter war, they'll change their minds and go back to Egypt. So God led the people on the wilderness road, looping around to the Red Sea. The Israelites left Egypt in military formation. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the Israelites solemnly swear to do this, saying, God will surely hold you accountable, so make sure you bring my bones from here with you. They moved on from Succoth and then camped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. God went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud during the day to guide them on their way, and at night in a pillar of fire to give them light. Thus they could travel both day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night never left the people. Let us pray. Dear God, help us to embrace an attitude of curiosity and wonder, so that the change that is happening in our congregation brings us growth and renewal. Open the gates of our hearts and minds and reveal the subtle blessings of this time of transition. Help us to see the new and unexpected graces of this time and to explore their dimensions. Grant us optimism and hope as we live into the future into which your Spirit calls us. Amen.
Amen.
So, leading through a clergy transition. Our God is the God of creation and is always at work, and so change is always around us, and it's a normal part of life. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't catch us off guard sometimes, sometimes, or that we don't have difficulty handling it. But if we see life as a journey and realize that those pillars of cloud and fire are always with us, and the Spirit is always calling something forth new in us, then we can put ourselves in a place where leading a congregation through a clergy transition is something that we can really do. And I'm going to use Moses and the story of the Exodus both this week and next to talk about the personal characteristics that we as leaders during a transition time need to exhibit, and that will help us help other people get through the transition, and come up with some particular examples, again using the Exodus story, of some things that we can do that will help people move through. But the most important thing to start with is with ourselves. How do we, as individuals, respond to change? What are the traits that we have as individuals that will help us to be leaders during this time? And where might our blind spots be? And how do we go about getting the resources that we need to compensate for those blind spots? So let's talk first of all about change itself and why change sometimes feels threatening. Michael Beer, who is now Professor Emeritus from the Harvard Business School, studied successful organizations, and he came up with 3 things that a successful organization has. And I think these apply to congregations too, because basically a congregation is a community, and it is in fact an organization. He calls them the 3 C's. And the first one is competence. Competence is the feeling that people have that they know what they're being asked to do, and they have the ability to do it. The second part, the second C, is coordination. And coordination is the feeling that there are other people within the organization, the congregation, the community, that can work with you, and that you know if there is a particular issue or problem that you want to address, you know who you should connect with. So in a congregation, for example, if I want to give memorial flowers on a Sunday, then I know how that process works in my congregation. I know who to call and when to do it and how much the flowers will cost. And so I have that sense of confidence that I can get something done that I want to get done. And the final one is commitment, that people are really committed to the mission, the purpose of the organization, of the congregation. And often commitment is built on personal relationships, and it may be built on a personal relationship with the rector. And so when the rector leaves, people don't feel so much of a sense of commitment, and they can check out either literally or sort of figuratively by just dropping back in terms of their involvement with the congregation. Commitment can also be damaged, if you will, if people lose a sense of competence and coordination. If they no longer feel that they have a place, they no longer feel that they know how things get done within the congregation, and that can lessen their sense of commitment as well. So for, excuse me, for each of us, when change happens, it can threaten one or all of these 3 C's. So let's talk about how these change readiness traits help you deal with some of those 3C issues in terms of your sense of competence, coordination, and commitment to the organization. I hope most of you had a chance to take the change readiness assessment before we started this session, but if not, it's there and you can download it. It's probably a little difficult for you to score as you are listening to this. So what I would suggest is, if you have not had a chance to do it, that you join in the conversation as we talk about these different traits, and then you, maybe after the session ends, you can find out what your own readiness score happens to be. I seem to have a dry throat. I'm not trying to pull a Marco Rubio here, but I'm going to just take a sip of water just a second. So if we look at these change readiness traits, there are 7 of them, and I want you to think about the Exodus story and think of an example where Moses exhibited any one of these traits. And you can type it into the chat box. Anybody, just type anything in that comes to mind. Where did you see Moses being resourceful or exhibiting optimism or confidence? So Judy, adaptable, partnered up with Aaron. Yeah. And we'll talk about Aaron a little bit next week, too. Right. And people said, you know, the people murmured. They said they wanted to go back to Egypt. You know, go straight ahead. Anybody else? Right. Face the people down on, back down into the angry crowd and face them again. And one day at a time. Water from the rock. Okay, you want me to do what in order to see you? Right. And in fact, confidence is an interesting one for Moses because he wasn't always confident. He argued with that burning bush. You know, I don't speak well. Let's let Aaron do this. I'm not the one to do it. And yet, he goes forward and he, in fact, challenges Pharaoh not once, but multiple times, and keeps going back until Pharaoh lets his people go. And he does not have as they cross the Red Sea and they enter into the wilderness period, he does not have a clear sense of where the promised land is or how they are going to get there. I guess you could call the pillars of cloud and fire sort of an early GPS system, but he had to step out in faith and know that they were going to be there and that they would wind up where God was calling them to be. So he's really a wonderful sort of model to think about in terms of all of these leadership characteristics. What I'd like to do now is to go through these a little bit, and we'll take them in clusters, a couple of clusters, and be thinking about your own scores as we go through these. And we'll just talk a little bit about them. First, though, for those of you who had an opportunity to take the assessment, I'd like you to answer, and we'll go to a way to answer it in just a minute. Think about it. When you saw your scores, did you think that this was an accurate picture of you, and why or why not? And thinking about the scores, what challenges might you face as you lead your congregation during this particular time? And then thinking about your own experience, when have you led a change successfully in the past, at work, with your family, at the church, in another situation, or where have you seen somebody else do it? And what were some of the characteristics, the individual personal characteristics that helped you or that person be successful? I'm going to go here now, and what we're going to do is ask you to chime in and talk, and you do that by raising your hand. And if you look up at the top of your screen, you should see a little bar, and there's a little white figure with his hand raised like this. And if you click on that, we'll know that you want to say something, and Miguel will unmute your mic, and you can get on and say what you think.
Great. So, as Sandy said, yeah, we're inviting a discussion in response to these 3 questions, and Julie, I'll also ask you to help us. Go ahead and do that. So, look forward to your thoughts.
Sum them into silence.
And Hollis. Great. Let me... Hi, Ann.
Of somebody else who knew me. Hi there. I thought this was a fairly accurate picture, but I wondered if somebody who knew me took this and rated me, if we'd come up with the same picture.
Ah, well, that's interesting. You know, that is something that you could do. I mean, you could give the change readiness assessment to somebody who knows you well and ask them to think about you as opposed to themselves, and let them give you some feedback and see how accurately, because you're right, we don't always know ourselves as well as we think we do. That's an interesting question. Do others of you have comments, or is there something that surprised you when you took the assessment?
And I'm wondering if you could, this is Miguel, I'm wondering if you could say just a little bit more about the second question of these 3, which is, you know, what challenges have you, what challenges you in leading change?
Well, partly I am new to Episcopalians, and I'm the senior warden, so it's sort of a challenge there. I don't know the traditions well. I'm also in northern Michigan, and our parish is mainly retired people and up, and it is very resistant to change. There has been a history at this parish of some leaders who were not well suited for the community. And so my biggest challenge in this change is listening to what everybody wants and not being in a hurry. I think that's the biggest challenge we have.
Great. Thank you, Anne. And we'll talk a lot more next week about things to do in terms of helping other individuals come along with the change too, and how the history of your congregation may impact, and you've already alluded to that a little bit, that some of the past changes haven't been successful ones, and so how that plays into the situation. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Others of you, do you have any comments or about the change readiness assessment as a whole? Looks like Judy has her hand up.
One thing I've learned is that we don't have to fix everything right this minute. I tend to jump in and want to make it all right now, and so one of the things I've learned is to just let it be, and the process will roll out by itself over time, and the solution will present itself.
That goes to that tolerance for ambiguity, perhaps, right? Okay, anybody else have something? Okay, then let's take a look at the traits themselves a little bit. Oh, let's see. Okay, here's some, came in on the chat. The incumbent rector's been here for 16 years, and there's a lot of history, which makes change difficult. And we'll talk about that some more next week when we turn our focus to the congregation and how its history can create some challenges, including actually for leaders. I mean, if somebody has been there for 16 years or has a long-term rectorate of any length, there often will be a number of people in the congregation who have never known a rector in that congregation other than the one who is leaving. And so when you think about how that change impacts them, that experience in and of itself makes it more difficult sometimes for them. Okay. Great. So let's go on and talk a little bit about the characteristics themselves. This is the first trait, resourcefulness. Obviously your ability to be resourceful is a real advantage when you're dealing with a situation of change. And Anne, you mentioned a few minutes ago about being relatively new Episcopalian and not necessarily knowing, the way things are done and what people's expectations are. Finding the resources to help you in a situation like that so that you're really clear on the process and you can talk to people and ask questions and listen, is going to be a huge benefit, and that's true for all of you. The thing about people who are always resourceful is that they can make a lot of extra work for themselves because they can always think of a better way even after they've gotten people to come along with whatever way they had just come up with. So with this trait, as with all the others, the importance is to have a balance, to not to be overboard on any one of these, and also not to have scores that are so low that it's basically missing for you. Optimism. This particular trait is the very heart of faith. It's what led Moses to step out into the wilderness and to keep going and to come back down from the mountain when people were rebelling, and not just to run away. It's that feeling positive and having faith in the future. And when the people in the congregation are worried because the rector is leaving, having that faith in the future and knowing that the mission of the congregation is going to continue and being able to articulate that is a big part of the job of a leader during the transition. Adventurousness, or a sense of adventure, which is easier to say. What if Moses hadn't been willing to go out into the wilderness? That's, and to try some new things, because he did come up with new ways of being together while they were in the wilderness. And he was really the ultimate risk taker. And if you don't take some risk and pursue the unknown and love the challenge of being in this time, then you can become sort of paralyzed. On the other hand, there is a lot to be said about making the change as smooth as possible and tying it as much to the past that is good and that you want to carry forward, the Joseph bones that you want to carry forward. That's really important.
Andy, it's Miguel, and if I may interrupt, I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you, so I was wondering if you could just speak up a little bit so that we can all hear you. Okay.
All right, thank you. Sorry. Passion and drive. Passion and drive is the kind of thing that if you don't have, can make this whole situation really exhausting. It's your personal commitment to seeing the change through, to seeing your congregation move through this time of transition and moving forward with a new sense of hope and promise for the future and into new ministries. Personal dynamism, determination, all of that sort of thing. If you don't have it, the challenges of being a leader during this time can cause you to burn out. On the other hand, if you are too passionate and don't have the time to sit down and allow some things to just develop, tolerate the ambiguity in the situation, and give people time to catch up with you, then you can come across as being sort of bullheaded and dictatorial. So let's stop for just a minute with just these four: resourcefulness, optimism, sense of adventure, passion and drive. And again, let's just see what kinds of questions or comments you have. What does all of this raise for you in terms of your own leadership during this time of transition? Again, this is a situation where we want you to raise your hand, and then we'll put you on the mic so that you can come in and share with the group.
And if you also want to make a comment simply in the chat box, please go ahead and do that as well.
I see Judy is typing, so see, She would like to hear others' experience of dealing with a congregation that is depressed, unenthusiastic after the departure of a beloved rector. So that's how do you maintain your sense of optimism, and how do you pull that sense of optimism out of others? Anybody have a good story to tell or an example? And maybe it hasn't been in your congregation. Maybe it has been someplace else in your life, at work or with a organization that you volunteer with or something. He's typing a response, so we'll see. Can you all see Lynn's response? She thinks it helps if you understand that there is always some chaos and sadness in any kind of transition, that it helps to find the champion of hope in a congregation. And we will spend some more time on this next week as well, which is that when change happens, we go back to those 3 C's. When change happens, people do feel that sense of discomfort, if you will, and so trying to make things comfortable, but still keeping open the possibility for something new to emerge, for the Spirit to call something forth, it's really an important piece of this. And, right, as Lynn points out, keeping focused on the promised land. If we think about the Exodus story, there always was that hope, and yet people who had known Egypt didn't make it through. So, but there was always that hope of the promised land. And not everybody could tolerate the ambiguity of the wilderness. You know, they dropped out. They married into the tribes that they came across when they were in the wilderness. Some probably died. So there will be those changes. Anybody else have a comment to share about these 4 particular traits? You know, what might you have to risk to make this work? What might you have to risk? All right, let's go on and talk about the next 3. Adaptability. Kurt Lewin, who is the founder of organizational psychology, talked about times of change as being times of unfreezing. The old way of doing something doesn't hold anymore, and the new way of doing things has not yet been established. It is a time of great hope, and it's a time when you can do some experimentation. And your ability as a leader to be flexible and resilient and adapt to the unexpected things that come up, and to be open to the call, if you will, of new ways of being church that might show up during this period. It's something that will hold you in good stead. Often when there is a change in clergy leadership, lay leaders need to step up to the plate to take on some responsibilities that maybe they hadn't before. If you have a period of time when you have supply clergy, for example, you may find yourself as a senior warden or a member of the vestry trying to line up the supply clergy and make sure that the sacramental parts of the worship life continue. But at the same time, you may have to ask lay leaders to take on more responsibility for pastoral care, for reading, for leading adult formation, whatever it happens to be. And that gives you an opportunity to bring people in, to involve them, and to try out some new ways of doing things. And you don't have to stick to them, because by the time the new person comes, they will have other ideas, and so you can change again. But to get people used to that and for you yourself to be adaptable in that situation is very helpful. Confidence. We talked about this with Moses already, that his confidence, which was not there at the beginning, but he grew in his knowledge and understanding of God's call to him and believed in his own ability to handle the situation, and obviously had a fairly high level of self-esteem. So high he could smash the first set of tablets and go back up and say, by the way, I broke them, I got angry, and I need another set. The other piece of confidence, though, too, is to have the ability to receive feedback. And Moses received feedback. I remember the part of the story where his father-in-law, Jethro, meets up with him in the wilderness. And he basically takes one look at Moses and says, you're a candidate for burnout, because everybody is bringing every complaint that they have to you. And you cannot function as a leader for all of the people if all your time is spent dealing with these issues. So they came up with a system of judges, and Moses stepped back from his day-to-day management kinds of duties to become the kind of leader that he needed to be. But he was able to take that feedback from Jethro. So part of your own confidence during this time is setting up some feedback mechanisms. Anne suggested at the very beginning of our conversation, she said, what if somebody else filled out this change readiness assessment, and about me, would they say the same things about me? That's one way of getting feedback. But the other is to build in just some standard procedures where there is feedback from the congregation, feedback from the vestry about how things are going, so that you can make the adjustments that need to be made. And you can realize when people might be getting upset or worried and be able to step in appropriately. So developing those feedback mechanisms for yourself is really important. Tolerance for ambiguity. Again, this is very much related to adaptability. It's being comfortable within a fluid situation. You need to be sure that you can still follow through on things, but you need to be able to tolerate that sense of ambiguity and not allow your own anxiety to show. If you can't tolerate ambiguity, because there will be some during a transition period, then you can be a candidate for burnout. So let's pause here again. We've now gone through all 7 of the traits, but let's think about these last three, although if you've got a comment or something about the previous four, you're welcome to chime in. What are some of the things that you have had or you think you will have to adapt in your congregation during this time of transition? Would be one question. And what do you need to have the confidence to lead through this particular time? What questions have come up for you? Where do you need to go for resources? Okay, so Dave Matheson says they're not planning much experimentation. They're going to have an interim who's not going to make any drastic changes. Do others of you have a different experience of a transition? One maybe that you went through in the past where there was some experimentation or something new came out of it? So Judy says that leaders need pastoral care, an amen corner, and a place to vent. Yeah, loneliest job in the world. So what has been the experience? Where did you find the support, Judy, or any of you who have been part of a search committee in the past? Where did you find the support for yourself so that you didn't burn out, so that you were able to maintain their sense of optimism?
This is Judy. I found it in a therapist.
You found a therapist, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I needed somebody to talk to where it was absolutely safe, and that was what worked for me.
Yep.
If I had it to do again, I think I would also build networks of support within the congregation.
Yeah. You know, another thing that helps often, and some dioceses do this actually, is to find other congregations within your diocese that are also going through transition and talk to the senior warden or the head of the search committee, whoever your counterpart is, in those congregations too. You can form your own support network. Some dioceses bring those people together periodically to do that, to have those conversations, you know, facilitated by the diocesan transition minister or somebody on diocesan staff or a search consultant or something. The other thing that I found very useful when I chaired a search committee was that I spent a lot of time team building with my search committee before we ever got started with the mechanics of the process. And that meant that as a group, we could speak as one, but we also could support each other so that when somebody was angry or got on one of our cases, the rest of us could help remind that person that, you know, this is maybe where that person, the angry person, was coming from, or we know that that person has been really upset by this transition, and, you know, just stay calm, stay calm. So you can build those support networks there too. Others of you have examples of where you have found help and support?
Sandy, this is Miguel, and as you were, this is more of a question actually. As you were going through, I was wondering about, you're going through about describing feedback mechanisms. So I was wondering if you could describe kind of a practical example of how someone would establish feedback mechanisms, whether it's the head of a search committee or a new rector within their congregation.
Right. It can be done in a number of different ways. One would be that you have a few trusted people that you can call on to check in with and say, how, from your perspective, are things going? Or I just gave a report to the annual meeting. How did it come across? Somebody who can be really honest with you. There are, in support networks, we all need different kinds of people. We need who will just comfort us. We need people who will help us clarify what we mean. So they say, I don't understand what you're talking about. Can you rephrase it for me? And so on and so forth. And we need people who will confront us about our own behavior. And so if you can find those people within your congregation that can play that role for you and give you honest feedback as an individual, that's terrific. The other way to do it is to have a more generalized process. Some churches during a transition process will have a suggestion box, or they will have periodic town hall meetings, and the search committee or the vestry or some combination will just get the feedback from people about how they're feeling, how things are going, just a time for people to talk and get things off their chest. What you want to be careful about is that you don't get caught in some triangle where, Susie tells John that she's mad at Sandy, and John comes to Sandy and says, Susie's mad at you. You need to make sure you don't get caught in that kind of a triangle. But looking for people who will be honest with you is a great way to initiate that feedback, and then setting up some processes where people can submit suggestions or feel like they're listened to is also really important during this time. Do others of you have examples of feedback mechanisms that you've used other than therapy and the ones that I just mentioned? Something else has worked for you in the past? Okay. So let's broaden this just a little bit. And if you look at your own change readiness scores, and you see that in some areas you are stronger than others, and in some areas you may need to find somebody to backstop you because that's not your gift, think about your congregation and remember that if they were to all take the change readiness assessment, they would all have very different scores. They would be in different places. Any individual's ability to tolerate ambiguity or to have confidence in themselves in a situation is going to be different. And the extent to which any of the 3 C's are disturbed for any of them is going to vary. So their individual readiness for change is going to vary as much as the individual readiness of all the people on this conference call varies. And you need to keep that in mind as a leader because that is part of how you can empathize with where people might be coming from. If you are aware of things that could be triggered in you and somebody approaches you and is upset, you can be empathic and begin to think about what could be going on here. Oh, yes. You know, she used to do this in the congregation and now she's not, or she lost her partner in doing it, and that may be feeding into this, and begins to help you as a leader look at your congregation and at the members of your congregation and bring them along through the change process by being able to respond to what you see about their characteristics and being able to tolerate and manage this change. I see that Dave Matheson said that they used a survey to gather input for his church, and that's another way to get some feedback. It's often used in the development of a profile, and so if the congregation likes the survey method and it works, then that's fine too. So any further sort of comments at this point? Directed conversations, appreciative inquiry, plus or minuses of these. Yeah. A lot of the things around a survey, a directed conversation, use of appreciative inquiry, those are often processes that are used to gather people's hopes and dreams about their congregation so that you can develop a profile and you can begin to discern the kind of ordained leadership that you would like to call to lead the congregation forward in mission. In terms of individual feedback for you as a leader, a directed conversation might work. I'm not as happy about surveys. There's a piece about getting feedback that it needs to be constructive feedback. And constructive feedback is something that is behaviorally driven. In other words, it doesn't help me much if you just tell me that you're angry at me. It does help me a lot if you say, Sandy, when you did this thing, it made me angry because, and therefore, in the future, if you want, I would prefer that you do it a different way, and you tell me what that different way is. So if you're looking for feedback around your leadership and around whether people are comfortable with what's going on, it really needs. Uh-oh.
Sandy?
Did you just lose me?
Nope,
Hello?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
There was just a very weird thing there that just said, hit a pound key or something. Anyway.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, I think that that's a piece about getting feedback in terms of your own leadership style and what's going on and whether people are going to be willing to follow you. But it does need to be pretty direct, and it needs to be constructive. So that's a different kind of feedback than the kind of feedback about how the process is working and whether people feel that they have enough information and so on. And we can talk some more about those next week. And in fact, what I'd like to do, since we have a few minutes left, unless there are some more particular questions about your own individual leadership style and your response to change, is to wrap up this session and give you a few minutes to identify some questions that have come up that you would like us to talk about next week. And you can just do it in the chat box as we are sort of closing down. And that can help guide some more of our discussion next week. But we can certainly talk about communicating within the congregation and using things like appreciative inquiry and so on next week.
Great. Sandy, I'm wondering, should we move to the discussion mode, or do you want to stay in this presentation model, in this presentation mode?
Well, if people have a lot of comments, then we can stay in. I have one more thing to say that would sort of wrap this up, and then maybe if we want to have some final comments, that would work. How about that?
That sounds great. Great.
Okay. So really, just to sort of sum up where we are, what we're really talking about in terms of leading during times of change and transition is what Peter Steinke calls being a non-anxious presence. At its heart, leadership during this time, and probably at any time, is the capacity to stay in control of one's own emotions and reactions, the ability to withdraw sufficiently from the heat of the moment to observe what is happening, including what is happening in oneself, to be able to reflect on one's observations and make changes as a result, to tolerate ambiguity and pain, and to maintain a clear sense of direction. And next week we're going to talk about some of the specific actions that you as a leader can take that will help move your congregation through this time of change and transition. And we will also be looking at how your congregation has handled change in the past. And so one of the things that we want you to do, and Miguel, maybe this is the time we need to go to the other modes so we can see the downloads, is I would like you to download the document that says how does your congregation handle change. And over the course of this next week, before we get together again, I'd like you to think about the questions in that and come prepared with some answers. You don't have to share everything, but jot some notes to yourself and be thinking about how the answers to these questions might affect your congregation's ability to transition smoothly through this particular change. And one of the questions, Dave, in response to a lot of the comments that you've been making, is, is this a long-term rectorate that is ending? And do people have any memory of having gone through this before? Because that will have an impact, obviously. And there's also there, if you want to look at it, it'll be there again next time too, a bibliography of resources if you want to read a little bit more or want to find some resources for yourself, for your vestry, for the search committee, beyond what we are doing here. And if you haven't had a chance to take the Change Readiness Assessment, and this has caused you to get a little more interested in doing so, there's another opportunity to download it there, and you can take it before next week.
Great. So just to make sure that everyone can see this, the files for download, I'm moving it right now, is right here in this box. And to simply download it, either the document, How Does Your Congregation Handle Change, or bibliography and resources, or the Change Readiness Assessment, whichever document, you click on the file that you wish, and then click Download File, and it will download to your own system. in the final minutes, as Sandy mentioned, we have a chance to, we're going to gather again next week for the second part. And if you have a particular question or concern or need that you feel you want to address, please enter that into the chat so that we can incorporate your question in some form or format into the next week's presentation. We have a lot of actually transition experts in the room at the moment. Sandy, of course, and then also Lynn Schmidt-Schrouder, as well as Tori Duncan and Judy Stark. So it would be really great to hear your questions and have those as part of next week's presentation.
Hey, shall we end with a prayer?
Sure.
Okay. So I'd like to return to the prayer that we started with at the beginning. Dear God, help us embrace an attitude of curiosity and wonder so that the change that is happening in our congregation brings us growth and renewal. Open the gates of our hearts and minds and reveal the subtle blessings of this time of transition. Help us to see the new and unexpected graces of this time and to explore their dimensions. Grant us optimism and hope as we live into the future into which your Spirit calls us. Amen.
Amen. Great. So, final request. I'm going to enter into the chat box a link to a survey, and we'd love for you to fill it out just so that we can get some feedback about this presentation, and then and also so we can think about the part 2. So here's the link, and it would be wonderful if you could fill that out, and so we can also get some information about how feedback about this presentation. And the final thing is just some contact information. How about general contact information first? If you have a question or concern, please email us or call the following information. And if you'd like to be in touch with any one of us directly, here is our contact information for all of you. So thank you again for joining us. And again, please fill out our survey. And thank you.
Thank you.